Right, let's see if my audio is working properly before we start. Because I always have that issue and I don't know why. It's kind of annoying. Hold on. Okay, are we good? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Because I cannot hear. Are my headphones even on? No. Okay, I'm working good. Okay. Wow. Didn't even turn my headphones on. Swear I'm not a complete idiot. Although I can understand if you think that. Alright, so I know I haven't really been here very often. I've been traveling a lot for work and it makes it hard because my entire setup is a desktop, not a laptop. So can only do it when I'm home, and then by the time I am home, I'm tired and don't want to, and I've got a whole bunch of other things going on in life. You know how things just happen. Life goes on. You get a lot happen. So I just haven't really been able to stay up on the stream, and I felt guilty, even though I shouldn't, because like it's not like it's a job or something. I'm doing this for fun. I'm doing this for people so they can see the latest stuff and to be able to talk about it and stay up. But yeah, I've felt kind of guilty that I haven't been on. And I finally kind of got on a lull. I've been traveling. I was up in Nevada and then I was in Eastern Texas. Never worked that far east. I know that's not that far east. But I've worked mainly Western US, and it's humid and it's hot, and it was completely different than where I had worked prior. So it was fun. It was nice to do something different. I hope I can travel some more, and now that the summer's kind of winding down, maybe I can do some more areas that I haven't worked previously. All right, so anything else to say? I have been working on the second episode of Ancient Apocalypse, and I don't know why I can't finish it, other than I just want it to be perfect, and every time I have to leave and come back, I have to restart over and add, like, oh, it's only a week and a half that you're gone, but coming back to a project, it makes it kind of difficult to uh, get back on it and remember what you wanted to say and stuff. I don't know. Maybe I need to be more organized. I've never been that organized with this because I didn't see this as a job or anything, and it was mainly just live streams. But then I started doing videos, and you have to be way more organized and uh skilled with that, man. Video editing is not easy. And when they keep slapping you with copyright because all the clips are too long, but then the clips really aren't that long at all and don't even get like a full sentence in, it makes it difficult. Sorry, I keep playing with my bangs because they're a little too long and they're getting in my eyes. Alright, without further ado, let's begin. Welcome everybody to my live stream, Archaeological News of Today, episode 3. I've started. I totally held up a 2, but it's a 3. I started numbering them because I never did before. I was just kind of titling it with one of the top articles I wanted to cover, but I figured numbering episodes might be better. So I started doing that. It's really not third time I'm doing this, but it's the third episode when I started doing numbering. Anyways, so let's go to this blog post, anthropology.net, prehistoric hominin remains sent to the edge of space, a controversial debate. I know my Twitter kind of blew up on this. I don't know what kind of Twitter you guys follow, but yeah, a lot of people had a lot to say about this, and I hadn't heard anything, and I've kind of been cut off from all uh, anthropological news, really, except for certain things that are sent to my email. I hadn't gone to my RSS feed collector thing in a long time, so I didn't even know this happened. Man, I feel completely out of whack, just not connected at all. Let's continue. Researchers are labeling the Virgin Galactic mission that transported the remains of Australopithecus sediba and Homo naledi to the edge of space as a significant violation of ethical standards. In a recent development that has sparked a heated debate within the paleoanthropological and archaeological community, the remains of ancient hominins, I think that's supposed to mean hominins, but a little bit of a typo, were sent to the edge of space on a suborbital flight. Why? While this event has captured public attention, it has left us all deeply concerned and divided over the ethics and implications of such an act. This blog post delves into the heart of the matter, examining the perspectives from both sides of the debate and the broader questions it raises about the treatment of ancient human remains. Oh, no, I just want to read. Okay, the Virgin Galactic flight on September 8th carried partial remains of two ancient human relatives, Australopithecus sediba and Homo naledi, on a journey to the edge of space. These fossils, transported in a cigar-shaped container by South African-born billionaire Timothy Nash, took off from Spaceport America, New Mexico. The selection of these fossils was made by Lee Berger. Lee Berger is the guy who is excavating Homo naledi. Like, he's the one leading the research on that. And there's a lot of other researchers as a part of it. It's a huge undertaking, but he's like the primary guy talking about it. An explorer in residence for the National Geographic Society and director of the Center for the Exploration of the Deep Human Journey at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. He also does a lot of YouTube stuff. He's very active on Twitter. I would recommend checking out his YouTube stuff because he actually takes the viewer into the excavation of the Rising Star Cave. It's super cool. Really awesome. I wish I could take a camera with me on my job so you guys, like, it's not as amazing and like scientifically groundbreaking as what he does by any stretch of the means, but giving people an idea of what your average archaeologist might be doing, I think would be a cool idea. But there's a lot of red tape there, so can't really, and don't really want to go through all that red tape. Okay. So this wasn't just like some millionaire, or was it billionaire, decided to buy some remains and took them up with him. This seems like it was kind of organized. A fragment of a 2 million-year-old A. sediba collarbone, initially discovered by Berger's son Matthew in 2008, and a thumb bone from H. naledi, a still mysterious hominin dating back 300,000 years. Found in the Rising Star Cave in 2013 by a team of researchers known as the Underground Astronauts, were chosen for this extraordinary journey. Although Lee Berger did not respond to requests for comment at the time of publication, he emphasized in a statement that this voyage signifies humanity's recognition of the contributions of all ancestors and ancient relatives. Matthew Berger speculated that these hominins, during their lifetime, could never have envisioned embarking on such an incredible journey, serving as ambassadors for all of humankind's ancestors. The controversy centers on a private company's decision to send the fossils of Australopithecus sediba and Homo naledi on a suborbital journey to the edge of Earth's atmosphere. The act itself is without a doubt a publicity stunt. It offers nothing to the community and risks loss of critical important remains. It has drawn strong reactions from the archaeological community. Many paleoanthropologists and archaeologists have expressed their dismay and outrage at this event. They argue that the decision to send human remains into space raises significant ethical concerns. This is something we've been doing. I know that Scotty from Star Trek was like part of his remains were shot into space. This isn't new. Some of their key points of contention include, yeah, so I think like the biggest ethical question is the fact that there is a limited amount of these remains. And though they may have been tested with the current knowledge that we have, new testing stuff could come out. So I think that's the biggest ethical question, not really should we be putting human remains in space. One of the primary concerns is the lack of respect for the deceased individuals whose remains were involved. Archaeologists emphasize the need for dignified treatment of ancient human remains, given their prehistoric and cultural significance. That's a difficult one. When handling human remains and what is considered respectful varies from culture to culture. Now, generally, you're not going to be swinging it around, stomping on it, there's basic things. But what is considered respectful is different for everybody. Some people may view cremation as incredibly disrespectful. Some people may not want any photographs taken of it, or just to even be touched is disrespectful. So that's difficult to say what is and is not respectful on the grand scheme of things when you don't know what these species would, or these cultures would have considered respectful. But there are basic things, not damaging or being crude to or like with the remains. Don't take someone's skeletal hand and pretend to smoke a cigarette with it, there's lots of things you can do. I'm sure plenty of stupid undergrads have done something that's disrespectful. And not even undergrads. I don't know why I said undergrads, just people in general have done something disrespectful to remains. But yeah, anyways, that's a hard one. Critics also argue that this event commercializes anthropology and archaeology and exploits human history for profit. They believe that the use of ancient remains in such a manner trivializes the discipline and turns it into a form of entertainment. I can see that, but also that's been going on for a while. You don't get research done if you don't get funded. That's just kind of how things go, and you don't get funded if you're not making headlines. Another issue raised is the absence of ethical oversight in allowing a private company conduct such a flight with human remains. Scientists advocate for stricter regulations to ensure the responsible handling of ancient remains. So who then? You want it to be like a federally regulated, not regulated, federal like organization rather than a private company. Personally, it's more of the act, not really who's like whether it's a private company or a federal organization doing it. I as long as it's like done within the parameters. If they're holding up their end of the deal and the contract that they signed, I don't care who, it's what's being done. On the other side of the debate, some argue that this event may have educational and outreach value. They contend that it could inspire interest in archaeology and space exploration, potentially bringing these fields to wider audience. Additionally, proponents suggest that the intention behind the flight was not to disrespect the deceased, but to celebrate human history and achievements. Beyond the immediate controversy, this event prompts broader questions about the treatment of ancient human remains. It highlights the ongoing challenges faced by archaeologists in balancing the preservation of cultural heritage with scientific inquiry, public engagement, and ethical considerations. Like I said, cultural heritage, we don't have their cultural heritage. We don't know what it was. The debate surrounding the recent suborbital flight of ancient human remains to the edge of space serves as a stark reminder of the complex issues that anthropologists and archaeologists grapple with. While some argue for the potential benefits of such events, others emphasize the need for greater respect, ethical oversight, and responsible handling of ancient human remains. As anthropology and archaeology continues to evolve, discussions like these are essential to shape the future of the discipline and ensure that the lessons of the past are preserved with dignity and integrity. I am opening up this post, blah, 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 blah. What do you think? I don't know. Like, what was the point of doing it? This article doesn't say what the point of that is, other than, hey, this was cool. Then it was purely a publicity stunt, which I understand, wanting to get funding and shit. Oh, sorry. Wanting to get funding. But that's a pretty expensive publicity stunt. That's an expensive publicity stunt that could result in the complete loss of those remains. And like I said, these are very, very rare and valuable to human history. Like, not monetarily valuable, but just valuable to our knowledge and how we came to be. I mean, this whole thing that we're studying is humans, the past, the history, how they evolved, all of that. And Homo naledi could indicate a huge key in that. But I think there probably could have been a safer publicity stunt to do. It said suborbital. Does that mean they're staying out there? I need more information. And if they're staying out there, why? Like, are they being taken out there to test somehow? Test something? I don't know. I kind of need more information. This blog post doesn't really give it all. I don't know why this blog post, they do talk about interesting stuff, but every time I've read it, it's never, I'm always saying I want more information. Okay, let's move on. What is this? Cookies. I don't want your cookies. Go away. Conserving a Burmese offering vessel. Conservation teams are hard at work getting objects ready for the museum's upcoming exhibit, Burma to Myanmar, which opens on November 2nd. Yes, I switched that because that's how we say it. More than 70 objects from the museum collection have been assessed for display, and many have been to the conservation studios for careful cleaning and repair. Conservation intern Maxim Chesnakov explains how he restored a spectacular bamboo and lacquer offering vessel over 6 weeks. Is this it? That can't be it. Oh, it is. In April 2023, I began my student placement in the Organic Conservation Studio at the British Museum. One of my first projects involved preparing one of a pair of sun oaks for display in the upcoming exhibition, Burma to Myanmar. A sun ok is a vessel for holding gifts and offerings made by people to Buddhist monks and monasteries. The vessel is intricately crafted from coiled bamboo strips, and its decorative surface is a spectacular example of the Hmanzi Shwe Cha style, a Burmese term to describe a technique where gilded relief work is set with colored glass. When the Sun Ok arrived in the studio for treatment, it was set out in this two main parts, a stand and lid, an internal offering tray sitting between the two. That is beautiful. And that's coiled bamboo? I guess you can kind of see coiling going on right there. Dang. What's all the gold on the outside? Is that actually like gold? It was made in about 1860 to 1890 and was showing evidence of age along with other condition issues. The object's complex shape meant that dust had settled in hard to reach places, and the aim of this treatment was to restore the object to its former glory by removing as much dust as possible and make sure the object was structurally stable before going on display in the exhibition. Yeah, that's the problem with all this intricate stuff. I love intricately decorated things. I know, like, I've got some really plain, uh, I don't even remember. They're secondhand from family, but some really plain bookshelves, but I would love to decorate those up. Man, there is a little gnat flying around and it is pissing me off and distracting me. But like there's like wood filigree type stuff you can get, and I want to decorate it anyways. This stuff, murder to dust. In advance of any cleaning, I wanted to learn more about the object's composition and how this might affect my approach to materials. Theo paste, a putty made of lacquer and bulky material such as ash, was used to craft the elaborate three-dimensional floral and abstract decoration. Oh, okay. Info which mirrored sequins, glass beads, and cut glass stones were pressed. Close examination of the decoration suggested that the surface was subsequently coated with lacquer to adhere the gold leaf. In multiple areas, the gold leaf overlaps the glass sequins, implying that the sequins had to be excavated again after gilding. Huh. In some areas, this left the sequins slightly recessed. This meant I had to take extra care when moving over the surface to clean the object to avoid catching the gilded surface with any cleaning material. Nope. What's this say? Detail of the Sun Ok lid with white arrows pointing to areas where dust had settled on the surface and into recesses. Okay. In advance of any cleaning, I wanted to learn more about the object's composition and how this might affect my approach to materials. Theo paste, a putty made. I just read that. Often the first instinct when seeing a dusty object is to assume it needs to be cleaned. Cleaning or removing dust is not always necessary, however, as it can often remove vital historical evidence of the object's use and history. But with this vessel, this was not the case, so we decided to remove more recently accumulated dust to allow the object to shine in the exhibition. I tested various materials and found the three surface cleaning products commonly used in conservation were effective in removing dust buildup in different areas. Firstly, I used a smoke sponge to remove the heavy embedded dust on the sides of the object. Smoke sponges are made of vulcanized rubber, which is just strengthened rubber, which traps dirt and dust within its bubbled structure when swiped against a surface. This sponge was originally manufactured for the salvage of fire-damaged buildings, and its ability to clean soot from walls gave the sponge its name. For removing the superficial dust which had settled on flat surfaces, makeup sponges worked well. These are soft, absorbent sponges with very fine pores that readily pick up dust and dirt when applied to a surface. Lastly, I used Broomstick, another vulcanized rubber product, which takes the form of a putty that can be molded into a skewer to form a small tip. This proved very useful. With its slightly sticky surface, dust particles could be trapped while reaching into the tiny crevices found on the object. Once the surface had been cleaned, I moved on to the next step of the treatment, ensuring the structural integrity of the vessel's finial, the ornamentation at the top of an object, which was showing signs of instability. The finial depicts the Hintha, or Hamsa, bird, a semi-divine creature associated with Buddhism and wisdom, which I felt was the crowning jewel of the object. The wings and tail of the bird had been intricately constructed from 4 separate metal sheets and lacquered and gilded like the rest of the object. That's a good... Maybe I should move me over here. There we go. That's a good image just to kind of show general size of this thing. Upon physical evaluation of the finial, I noticed that the sheets of metal forming the tail were coming apart from the central column on top of the lid. And because these were at risk of detaching completely over time, I decided that they should be treated. Okay. Oh dear, what is that? That's so sad. I'm getting kind of bored. I'm not reading all of this. Bits that came off. They's got to reattach somehow. That is beautiful. It's huge. Okay. Moving on. What do we have? Study reveals deliberate crafting of stone spheres by early human ancestors 1.4 million years ago. Some nice round boulders. That's a nice boulder. What sets humans apart? The unique ability to remember order. No. Behavior of mothers after infant loss in bonnet macaques. This is a full PDF. We'll read the abstract and then move on. How's that? Mother... It left. Freaking gnats, man. They're annoying. Mother-offspring bonds in primates often last for life and shape the behavior of both mother and offspring. Therefore, the death of an infant may trigger an emotional response from its... He's fast. All right, continue. Therefore, the death of an infant may trigger an emotional response from its mother akin to human grief. It's just, they may feel as deeply as us humans do, which is characterized by active distress and passive depression. Our goal was to investigate whether the behavior of female bonnet macaques changed after the loss of their infants. In the Thenmala area, southern India, between 2020 and 2022, we observed 18 mothers in 2 groups who lost, in total, 19 infants and 3 juveniles aged less than 18 months. We compared affiliative, aggressive, and stress-related behavior of females before and after the death of their infants. Someone lost 2 infants. That sucks. We also examined individual variations in responses to infant loss. After the death of their infants, females withdrew socially, stayed on the periphery of the group, and had fewer companions. Bereaved females were less involved in grooming and hugging, initiated aggressive behavior more frequently than before they lost their infants. See, that's an important little factor there. It's they're comparing the behavior of the individual to the behavior of the individual post this traumatic thing, rather than the at the time the individual compared to other females who hadn't. Moreover, females who lost infants showed frequent stress related behaviors, such as self scratching and yawning, compared with when their infants were alive. Our results suggest that female bonnet macaques react to deaths of their infants in a manner that is consistent with the interpretation of grief in humans and other primates. Okay. Sad, sad little macaques. That sucks. Essentially, they grieve. Humans aren't the only species to have feelings. Study links. I know that sounds like really condescending, but having research like this that actually documents and has a scientific way of addressing this and recording it is really important. I know that as average people, we may look at an animal and be like, yes, that's sad, just by paying attention to the animal. But you got to be able to look at this as like a stepping stone into higher questions that we maybe have for our primate relatives. Study links epigenetic changes to historic trauma in Alaska Native communities. So, jeez, let's just summary. Researchers investigated the relationship between historical traumatic events experienced by Alaska Native communities and epigenetic markers on genes that previous studies have linked to trauma. A new study found a similar pattern among Alaska Native participants, with specific epigenetic differences observed in those who reported experiencing the most intense symptoms of distress when reflecting on historic losses. Researchers investigated the relationship between historic traumatic events experienced by Alaska Native communities and epigenetic markers on genes that previously. Yep. The study also found that individuals who strongly identified with their Alaska Native heritage and participated in cultural activities generally reported better well-being. The new findings are detailed in the International Journal of Health Equity. I didn't know that was a journal. The study is the result of a close collaboration between the scientists and members of two Alaska Native communities. The Native nations guided the design and interpretation of the study and retained control of all of the data. In accordance with principles of indigenous data sovereignty, said Ripan Mali, a professor of anthropology at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and corresponding author of the new study. While DNA sequence remains stable throughout the lifespan, small chemical modifications to specific genes can turn up or turn down the expression of these genes. Such study lead author Mary Levine, who conducted the analysis while postdoctoral researcher of the U of I. One interesting thing about that an article I saw of epigenetics is looking at mothers who were pregnant during 9/11 and then looking at the infants and kind of following them over the next few years and analyzing any health issues that they may have had, and what genetically may be kind of changing because of it. It's interesting stuff. These epigenetic modifications are often studied in response to severe changes in lived environments. Levine said epigenetic alterations can persist throughout the lifespan and are sometimes maintained over multiple generations. Research on epigenetic changes in response to trauma is in its infancy, but studies involving other groups have found trauma-related modifications to genes involved in homeostasis, the immune response, the stress response, and other functions, Mali said. So we're just kind of getting into epigenetics and have a lot to study with it. I'm curious if the trauma is having an effect. Does the opposite have an effect? So say one generation lives through some really tough times. A famine occurred, or they couldn't afford things, or a civil war happens, or a plague, or whatever. Um, Anything. That generation, trauma, epigenetic change, right? What if the next generation lives very happy, has all the food they could need, no major traumatic things happen? How does that affect epigenetics as well? A lot harder to study. That wouldn't be very easy when studying trauma and major events is bam right there. You can see it, you know. Native communities in Alaska have experienced centuries of disruptive violence, disease, and displacement, largely resulting from colonial expansion into the Americas and centuries of mistreatment well beyond the colonial era. Notorious examples of historical trauma in Native American and Alaska Native peoples include genocide and cultural genocide. Forced relocation and the boarding school era, the authors wrote. Such experiences have often Such experiences often leave lasting psychological scars. For example, study co-author Rosita Worrell experienced the trauma of being separated from her family as a young child. Worrell is the president of Sealaska Heritage Institute, a nonprofit organization in Southeast Alaska that works to perpetuate Alaska Native cultural traditions. Her Tlingit names are Yediklasokwa and Kahani in the Tlingit Cha'ak moiety of the Shangukaiti clan. Whew. From the Kaudiliai height, house lord from the sun. In Klukwan. Whew, that was. Can you tell I can't speak Tlingit? I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that one right. I think it's Klingit, something like that. At the age of 6, I was kidnapped and taken from my grandparents, supposedly to an orphanage. Worrell said she was taken to a Presbyterian boarding school, which used a system of mass punishment on children who misbehaved, requiring the other students to collectively beat them with wooden paddles. Ugh, making the students do it. That's horrible. Worrell said she remembers lying in bed, staring at the mountains, and wondering why she was there. It definitely left scars, and I do know that I suffered from trauma, she said. I'm just curious why it was from her grandparents. She was taken to an orphanage by who? And why was it the grandparents? Where were her parents? Nah, it definitely left scars. Yeah, I can see why. Among other harms, such experiences alter a child's social and psychological development. Oh yeah. Worrell said, having been deprived of a chance to learn how a family functions, such individuals often lack basic insights into parenting their own children. There is an impact on generations and generations of Native people, she said. To better understand how such experiences might affect gene expression, the research focused on one type of epigenetic change called DNA methylation. The study looked at whether people's feelings of sadness, anger, or anxiety when reflecting on traumatic events coincided with specific changes in DNA methylation. As previous studies in other groups have found, the second element of the study looked for evidence that Alaska Native cultural identification correlates with well-being. Participants completed surveys on cultural identification, historical traumas, and general well-being, Molly said. Questions include the frequency of thoughts of historical traumas and losses and the symptoms experienced when reflecting on those events. Some of the symptoms that people reported included increasing sadness, depression, anger, or anxiety when thinking about different types of historical traumas. Well, duh. Levane said they also may have disturbed sleep, feel distant from other people, or experience fear that the traumas will happen again, of course. The surveys took place in community clinics and centers including Alaska Native cultural centers with community counselors on hand and available to participants. The team also collected blood samples from the 117 Alaska Native participants to investigate methylation at more than 850,000 sites across the genome. The study found associations between the symptoms that arose when participants reflected on traumatic events in their own community's history and DNA methylation of specific genes. Some of the methylated genes had been previously implicated in similar studies of traumatized groups such as children in Russian orphanages and people with major depression or PTSD after experiencing distressing events. For example, we found methylation of one of the genes identified in a similar study of early childhood deprivation. Levane said, another methylated gene in our study had differential expression in individuals with PTSD in a separate study. We also found a positive association between cultural identification and Alaska Native people's feelings of general well-being, she said. The findings really complemented evidence from oral narratives, things participants were telling us about cultural identification and well-being. Okay. The findings are not proof that the historical traumas are causing the differences seen in DNA methylation, Levane said, but they add to the evidence suggesting that traumatic events leave a physical as well as psychological imprint on those afflicted and on those affected and their descendants. The study also speaks to the factors that help people remain resilient and thrive. I always tell our kids we come from strong people. We've survived rises of the sea, lowering of the seas, advances of the glaciers, retreats of the glaciers, suppression of our culture. We've survived it, Worrell said. But we have, those who are still wounded. Ripon Mali also is an affiliate of the Carl R. Woese Institute for Genomic. Okay, so I'm still confused about what exactly they were looking at. Because they said they asked questions about these traumatic situations and whether and what those feelings were. Was it just the descendants of these people who went through it, or was it the people who actually went through it? And they took blood from the people who went through it, or just the descendants? I'm confused exactly what they did here. I don't know if I'm just not picking up on something. It's stable throughout the yeah. Not fully lasting psychological scars, for example, study co-author, yep. Her personal trauma. To better understand how much experiences might affect gene expression, the research focused on one type of epigenetic change called the DNA methylation. Looks at whether people's feelings of sadness, anger, or anxiety when reflected on traumatic events coincide with specific change in the DNA methylation, as previous studies in other groups have found. See, okay, the study looked at whether people's feelings of sadness, anger, or anxiety when reflecting on traumatic events coincide with specific changes in DNA methylation, as previous studies in other groups found. Coincide how? Are they saying that people who weren't a part of the events, their descendants, are emotionally affected by the fact that their people went through this, their grandparents or whatever, and that's affecting them epigenetically? I'm confused on this. Okay. Anyways, I asked my questions. Let me know what you guys think. Am I reading something wrong? I don't know. Moving on. Monstrous births and the making of race in the 19th century United States. From the Middle Ages to the Enlightenment, quote, monstrous births, malformed or anomalous fetuses were, to Western medicine, an object of superstition. In 19th century America, they became instead an object of the modern scientific study of monstrosity, a field formalized by French scientist Isidore Geoffroy Saint Hilaire. This clinical turn was positioned against the backdrop of social, political, and economic activity that codified laws governing slavery, citizenship, immigration, family, wealth, and access to resources. Whew, that summary is all over the place. What is this about? From the Middle Ages to the Enlightenment. Yep. Rich presents three frameworks or logics of race that structured the studies of monstrous birth, beginning with the schema of development in the field of teratology. Teratology, informed by the theory of epigenesis, proposed that monstrosity was caused by an arrest in the development of a fetus before it could reach its final, more perfect form. This model was predicated on a belief in both teleological progress and a hierarchy of being. It overlapped with taxonomies of race that placed white Europeans at the top and therefore implied a correlation between infant monsters and the racialized subjects who fell farther down the continuum of species. As Rich writes, through the scientific framework of teratological development, monstrosity gained specificity as a way to articulate the nature of racial difference as hierarchical, temporalized, and biologically embodied. Wow. The second logic of race articulated by Rich is that the monster as a race apart. The race apart framework proposed that monstrous births comprised their own species, distinct even from human race categories, and was supported by the fact that monsters could be born to women of any race. Rich draws upon the examples of an enslaved black woman in Georgia and a white English woman in Philadelphia, both of whom gave birth to infants with anencephaly. What is anencephaly? What is this? Is the absence of a major portion of the brain, skull, and scalp that occurs during embryonic development. It is a cephalic disorder that results from a neural tube defect that occurs when the rostral end of the neural tube fails to close, usually between the 23rd and 26th day of following conception. Neural tube, okay. Whew. I don't know if I want to look at these images. I mean, there's a drawing right here with Wikipedia, and it's already pretty, yeah. I'll go with the drawing. I'm not going to look at the pictures. Alright, next. What are we... As she notes, within a leading taxonomic cosmology of the era's medical science, the two women in these cases did not belong to the same species as one another. But remarkably, their monstrous infants did. Rich suggests that despite the departure this theory represents from contemporary notions of race as congenital and immanent, the race apart thesis was ultimately used to legitimize a system of racial hierarchy. The third and final logic of race examined in this article is that of monstrosity as racial degeneracy. In the aftermath of emancipation, fears on the part of white hegemony regarding the destabilized racial categories that slavery had once upheld were transmuted into fears regarding social and evolutionary decline. Since the favored model of Darwinian evolution at this time was one of progress, and the theory of teratology had conflated fetal developmental progress with whiteness, monstrous births in this period were seen as signs of Atavism? What is this? The reappearance of a characteristic in an organism from several generations of absence. Oh, okay. And thus of regression into non whiteness. In addition to reinforcing the racial boundaries of the late 19th century, Rich writes, the schema of monstrosity would also pave the way of early 20th century eugenics. Rich argues that the interpretation of monstrosity used by 19th century scientists had significant implications for the racial caste system of the United States and for medicine as a discipline. The study of monstrous births shaped human reproduction into a site of inscription of fixed racial differences and embedded within modern medical discourse a practice of racial hierarchy. Okay, I still don't understand how. I don't get the connection going on. They even said that like a monstrous birth occurred. They knew it to occur regardless of the parent's race, so I don't really know how this author is making that connection that it was to be racist. Is this a what is this? This book? Volume History of Science Society. Essay analyzes the medical study of monstrous birth as a site of race making in the 19th century United States. It argues that the medical theorization of monstrosity was structured by multiple logics of race, which both shaped and emerged from medical authorities' efforts to classify and interpret anomalous newborn bodies. Materialized at the intersection of these logics, the biological monster theorized a racial order that was hierarchical, temporalized, and vulnerable to dangers of women's reproduction. In this context, monstrosity became a way to advance claims about the nature of racial hierarchy, articulate the threat and mechanism of racial degeneration, and negotiate the contradictions of shifting racial imaginaries across the 19th century. Exploring the medical engagement with monstrosity thus sheds light on entanglements of medical science and race making in US history, showing how practitioners produced elaborated, unstable concepts of scientific race and revealing how race was linked to reproduction in the emergence of modern biomedical discourse. Okay, so they're saying because sometimes there would be a birth defect, these monstrous births were another species from humans past, and they use that. I still don't get how it's connected to I don't know. I'm done with this. Okay, moving on. Meet Brother Jonathan, predecessor to Uncle Sam. You know this. I've seen that. Oh no, it's similar to that one, but it's not a red coat. It's a like businessman. And then there's like a little starving man all hunched down. That comic strip. Plague on you, cries Brother Jonathan in an 1813 political cartoon. He wears a colonial hat and a mischievous smile as he assaults a redcoat with a mug of fermented pear juice. It was a typical appearance for this young and brash character who first entered political cartoons during the Revolutionary War, inspired by Jonathan Trumbull, governor of Connecticut and a close wartime advisor to George Washington. Brother Jonathan became a wartime mascot, embodying the upstart energy of the early United States. Over the next few decades, as the country outgrew this rambunctious youngster, he was slowly edged out by a figure we now know as Uncle Sam. Originally named after a meat magnate from New York State in the Civil War, Sam grew a beard modeled on Lincoln's. Uncle Sam didn't really become a household name until Thomas Nast's sketches in Harper's Weekly in the late 1860s and 70s, when Nast made him a hero of the Union cause. An 1869 cartoon by Nast shows Sam leading a multiracial Thanksgiving meal above abolitionist catchphrases "Come one, come all," and "free and equal." Unlike Jonathan, Sam wasn't a stand in for the citizenry or even the soldiers. More and more, he came to symbolize the federal government. His poise and gravity were better suited to rally a divided country and to lead the nation through its increasing sovereign entanglements in World War I and II. Sam was a tough love military recruiter, well muscled, with his sleeves rolled up and his shoulders broad like an athlete's. That same stern visage had continued to bolster the government's domestic authority, particularly during each tax season. Even today, Sam continues to evolve. And Claire Jerry, a curator of the National Museum of American History, says that there is an ongoing conversation among historians and archivists about whether it's time for him to get yet another makeover. The question, as Jerry puts it, is how can he, in fact, symbolize the whole country? Perhaps he can't, but one possible answer is to portray Uncle Sam as multiracial. And over the past decade, there has been increasing interest in creating a black Uncle Sam. As Jerry says, Uncle Sam will evolve along with us. See, Uncle Sam was used as propaganda. You, sir, at the Museum of American History, are looking at this to want to utilize Sam further in propaganda, not really as a museum curator. You're not archiving and protecting the past, you are trying to utilize it for the future. And what you want, shouldn't it kind of organically go? Not really. I don't know. Uncle Sam, I never thought he had a good rep. I don't know. Every time someone says Uncle Sam since I was a child, it was not good. It was always something like Uncle Sam always gets his cut, stuff like that. So yeah, that doesn't seem very good. Oh. The unlikely enduring friendships between Ireland and the Choctaw Nation. On March 23rd, 1847, at a meeting in the small town of Scullyville in Indian Territory, that is a cool town name, that is cool, Major William Armstrong, the U.S. agent of the Choctaw Nation, took to the floor to speak. In attendance gathered in a stone and timber building were tribal members, agency officials, missionaries, and traders. Armstrong, reading aloud from a pamphlet, informed them about an event taking place on the far side of the Atlantic and of no obvious interest to the Choctaw people, the Great Famine in Ireland. Small town of Scullyville in Indian Territory. I wonder if I can find a map for that. Scullyville. Because it's not called Indian Territory anymore. Scullyville. Sugarloaf. So a town called Scullyville is north of a town called Sugarloaf. That's cool. Mm. Okay, but I want to know where it is. Just show me on a map. Problem is, the old map is so zoomed in, I can't tell where. I guess it's Scullyville, Oklahoma, right? Yeah, probably. It was the capital of Choctaw Nation, capital of the Tubby district of the Choctaw Nation. Let's see. Hey, you don't have the map there. It was marked. All right. Here we go. Boom. Right here. So I click on it and it's gone. Don't know why. But Scullyville, right there. That's where we're talking. And then all of that was Indian Nation. This was still part of Texas at the time, I think, because that became part of Oklahoma. Texas decided to join. Anyways, we're talking right there. Where was I? Nope, that was not it. Nope. 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 Ah. The historical record doesn't reveal exactly what Armstrong said at the gathering, and so far, no one has unearthed the pamphlet distributed by the Memphis Irish Relief Committee, but the generous response of the Choctaw is well documented, and it has given rise to a seemingly improbable friendship between the Irish and the Choctaw Nation. In large part, the bond between the two people is based on their shared experiences of colonization, mistreatment, and suffering. Many Irish were already living in harsh conditions before the famine. Seeing the extreme poverty in the west of Ireland in 1835, the French journalist and political theorist Alexis de Tocqueville described a collection of misery such as I did not imagine existed in this world. By the time Armstrong addressed the Choctaw people, it was clear the famine in Ireland had been catalyzed by the failure of the potato crop that poor rural people depended on. The deeper underlying cause was that Ireland, colonized by England centuries before, had been forced into a land tenure system that enabled mainly English landlords to extract substantial profits from Irish tenant farmers while leaving many of them destitute. For these poor rural Irish families, modest beds, chairs, and tables would have been the extent of interior furnishings considered luxuries. Nearly half of them were living in one room, windowless mud cabins. Evicted and unemployed families lived in even worse conditions. They put roofs over ditches and burrowed into the banks, or lived in turf huts in wet, muddy bog holes. Tenant farmers raised grain crops to pay the landlord's rent. To feed their own families, the workers grew potatoes that were boiled and eaten at every meal, augmented by milk or buttermilk and sometimes bacon and salted herring. Once the blight came, the families were without a primary staple for nourishment. The British government was of little help. Charles Edward Trevelyan, a top Treasury official, curtailed the government's subsidized food distribution program, even at one point rejecting a shipload of corn. Too much aid might paralyze trade, he wrote in a letter, and would leave the Irish habitually dependent on government. Instead, in the fall of 1846, Trevelyan managed a public works program arranging for hundreds of thousands of Irish, including some women and children, to build stone roads and dig ditches for a pittance. It's believed that many Irish people collapsed while working on the roads. Others huddled for warmth on unsanitary cabin floors, providing ideal conditions for the spread of typhus and other diseases. Historians estimate that more than 1 million Irish people died between 1845 and 1851, either from starvation or hunger related disease, 1/8 of the population. Another million people left Ireland, mostly to England, Canada, and the United States. The vessels that carried the disease ridden and malnourished Irish refugees were known as coffin ships. That's the picture of the Great Famine we have today. The account provided 176 years ago by Armstrong, an Irish American friendly to Choctaw despite being a government official, communicated that mass starvation and land evictions were taking place, and the Irish people needed help. The Choctaw were deeply moved. Some reportedly wept despite their own impoverished circumstances and the recent disposition of their homelands. They raised either 174 or 710, the number is disputed, the dollars, the latter of the equivalent of more than 5,000 today, to help with famine relief efforts. At the time of their donation, little more than a decade had passed since the U.S. government brutal removal of the Choctaw from their homeland in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama, relocation to what is now Oklahoma, part of the forced mass migration of Native Americans that would be remembered as the Trail of Tears. On the new land, many. Oh dear. I'll be back. I'm back. Sorry about that. What did I do? Clicked on here. Oh dear. Sorry, no, I had to run to the door. Anyways, I'm back. Let's continue on to what the Choctaw did for the Irish. At the time of their donation, little more than a decade had passed. On their new land, many Choctaw members were living in poverty with inadequate housing and little access to food. In Scullyville, at the time of the Irish famine donation, several hundred Choctaw were camped around the government agency, hungry and destitute and dying of illness, which only makes the tribe's generosity all the more astonishing. That's funny. Oh, let's go learn about archaeology. Oh no. Mm-hmm. Choctaw were generous. Let's see. Several hundred Choctaw were camped around the government. The words of historian and Annalise Hanson Shrout, writing in the Journal of the Early Republic, it is difficult to imagine a people less well positioned to act philanthropically. The money collected in Indian Territory that day in 1847 went to Memphis and then New York City, where organizers wrote it had been contributed by the children of the forest, the Choctaw Nation. It was likely used to buy grain and other foodstuffs that were shipped across the Atlantic. 7 Irish newspapers published accounts of the generous Choctaw. Quakers who played a key role in relief efforts could have distributed the materials to the Irish. Then, for nearly a century and a half, the gift was almost entirely forgotten. The person most responsible for resurrecting the story of the Choctaw gift, as it became known, is Don Mullen, an Irish humanitarian, author, and filmmaker. Mullen and his wife, Margaret, live in a semi-detached house in a modest suburb in South Dublin. I went there to ask him how it happened. During a traditional Sunday lunch of roast lamb, potatoes, and vegetables, he pointed to a portrait on the wall of Desmond Tutu, the late South African bishop and human rights activist who was a close friend of the Mullins. In 1984, Tutu came to Our Lady of Lourdes Church in Dublin and he talked about children in the townships of South Africa drinking water to fill their stomachs. This is a bit of a tangent. He was struck by the parallel with Ireland in the 1840s. The only crop that failed in Ireland during the Great Hunger was the potato. Wheat, barley, corn, oats, and grazing land for livestock were all flourishing, but these were cash crops for export, and Irish people, even as they starved to death, were forbidden to eat them. Mullen says once shipments of grain and a variety of other commodities reached the Irish market towns under the eyes of the hungry populace, they were often guarded by military escorts until they were safely shipped out of the country. Listening to Tutu and remembering his story inspired Mullen, as director of the humanitarian organization Action from Ireland, to create the Great Famine Project. He describes it as a marking or commemoration for the million Irish who died and 2 million who ultimately emigrated. We put famine in inverted commas because we questioned the whole concept of famine. Since there was no food shortage in Ireland, he says, noting all the food that was being produced in Ireland and exported. Mullen was speaking about the project in upstate New York when someone in the audience approached him and said, "Did you ever get with the Choctaws? The Choctaws helped the Irish." Mullen and had read Cecil Woodham Smith's 1962 book, The Great Hunger, which contains half a sentence of the gift. Now, sensing the power of the story, he started searching for more information. He tracked down the Arkansas Intelligencer, one of the first newspapers to record the gift, referring to the poor Indian sending his mite to the poor Irish. What moved him, Mullen said, was the context in which this happened. Mullen? With the Indian Removal Act and the Trail of Tears, the Choctaws had suffered a horrendous brutality at the hands of the white Europeans, and yet, despite that, they could allow their humanity to supersede any prejudice they were entitled to carry. As it happens, Tocqueville had witnessed the tragedy as well. In the winter of 1831, he stood on the riverbank of Memphis and watched a large band of Choctaw board a ship from Arkansas side of the Mississippi River en route to Indian Territory. The cold was unusually severe. The snow had frozen hard upon the ground, and the river was drifting huge masses of ice. The Indians had their families with them, and they brought in their train the wounded and the sick, with children newly born and old men upon the verge of death. They possessed neither tents nor wagons, but only their arms and some provisions. Never will that solemn spectacle fade from my remembrance. Between 1831 and 1833, an estimated 15,000 Choctaw people traveled the Trail of Tears, a journey of more than 500 miles, and approximately a quarter of them died along the way. In 1989, Mullen, determined to tell the story, produced a radio program about the Choctaw gift for Ireland's National Broadcasting Service. Nobody knew about it in Ireland except maybe famine historians, he says. People were removed by it. The following year, Mullen visited the Choctaw of Oklahoma and thanked them for the gift. There was a lovely reception there, and I think they were as curious as anyone that the Irish person was on their doorstep. Although they didn't remember anything about the gift, it made sense to them, Mullen says, because giving and helping others is a big part of Choctaw culture. That's funny. Nobody remembered this, and now it's a big deal. Anyways, super cool, you know? People helping people. It's the best of humanity. One more quick one. Archaeologists are using modern tools to learn about visitors? No. Causes of the Qing Dynasty collapse, parallels to today's, no. No. Locations of these shipwrecks are no longer a secret. Yeah, sure. If you've got another story, share it. Ancestors of modern humans faced near extinction event 900,000 years ago? No. I want to do another anthropology nat. Traumatic. For Lady Liberty, there was Lady Columbia, America's first national mascot. Well, hey, we did an Uncle Sam one. Let's look up the park deer raid. Let's see. What is this? What are the odds you'll hit a deer? No, that's not right. Trial in Edinburgh? I don't think that's... What? I'm just trying to find an account of the park deer raid of 1887 from the notes of Angus MacLeod, Calboust, and Mary Bank. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure this out with it. Choice of campsite. $1887. I see that, but Angus MacLeod archive, maybe? Hey! Not cool. Try to do a link and it just tries to freaking download something. Remembering the land struggle in the Isle. Isle of Lewis? No. Boop, boop, boop. Where it started. See. Okay, so the Hebridean connections. Account of the park deer raid of 1880. Oh, let me. Is this what we're talking about? 1887 from the notes of Angus MacLeod and Mary Bank. There have been a great deal of unrest prior to 1887 throughout the whole of Lochs because of the land hunger due to the rising population. In spite of the recent Napier Commission and Crofters Act, Park did not have a tenant from 1883 until 1886, and some crofters and cotters from Lochs had pleaded with Lady Matheson, the proprietress of Lewis at the time, to rent parts of Park Estate to them. She did not deign to reply, which caused anger and frustration among the Lochs people. In January 1887, the famous Land League stalwart Donald McCrae became headmaster of Ballylin School, and he soon won the favor of the crofters. After a series of meetings held in Ballylin School organized by him, it was decided to raid Park Deer Forest and kill as many deer as possible in order to bring the dire straits and poverty of the Lochs people to the attention of the authorities and the public. In 1886, Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Platt rented Park from Lady Matheson, and the national press were informed of the imminent deer raid, which was to take place on Tuesday, November 22nd, 1887. The raid was undertaken with gusto. The North Lochs contingent was led by a piper and other carrying flags. They met the South Lochs contingent at Verishal, near Seaforth Head. Mr. Joseph Platt was out with the island at the time, but his wife, head keeper under Keeper and Gillies, met the raiders at Seaforth Head, and she tried to persuade them to go back home. The raiders did not heed her, but marched forward, someone muttering, "No English, my lady." That's funny. From Tuesday until Saturday, the slaughter of deer went on, and a camp was set up at Airy Domhnaill near Loch Seaforth, where deer were boiled and roasted to satisfy the pangs of hunger of the people who had been without proper sustenance for so long. The choice of the campsite by the raiders may have been of significance, named after the famous or infamous one-eyed Donald Macaulay from Whig, who, despite his many misdeeds, was a man of iron will and courage. Domhnaill Cam at one time had grazing rights in park, and he used to bring cattle from Whig across the moor to Loch Seaforth, a long trek at slack tide at the ebb. What? At slack tide at the ebb. What does that mean? The cattle were forced to swim across the narrows. Oh, is that like low tide? I don't know. The cattle were forced to swim across the narrows of the Shruth. The strong current opposite. Oh my god, there's so many words here I can't pronounce. And it is said that the redoubtable Donald and his helpers were towed across hanging onto the tails of the cows. Tired and wet, they rested for the night on the parkside, hence the name Airy Domhnaill Chain. The authorities did not regard the park deer raid with any sympathy, and action was taken forthwith. A detachment of Royal Scots was dispatched from Maryhill Barracks, Glasgow, under the command of a Captain Farquharson. Farquhar. Let's say Captain Farquhar. The soldiers were greeted in Stornoway by Lady Matheson, and they marched, led by a piper, to barracks at Manor Farm. An abortive attempt was made to send HMS Ajax from Greenock with 400 men aboard, some of them Marines, to subjugate the raiders from Lochs. However, the rudder of the Ajax was broken in a gale of Ardmurchan, and she had to be ignominiously towed back to port. After much expense on the part of the authorities, the saga ended with the sixth of the ringleaders being arrested and taken to court in Edinburgh for trial, which lasted 2 days. A not guilty verdict was returned on all 6 accused. The case had far-reaching effects not only in Lewis, but throughout the Highlands, as the landlords realized that the courts of justice no longer favored the rich against the poor. I don't speak English. That's funny. Ah, public outcry. Okay. Interesting. Hey, let us hunt this land. We're hungry. No. Okay, well, we're just gonna go take it then? No, turn back. I don't speak English. That's funny. It was a good one to end with. Thank you. I always like learning about such things. Very cool. Interesting stuff. I think I'm going to go ahead and end it there. It's been about an hour and a half. Didn't cover everything, but that's okay. Never do. Yeah. Hopefully I can actually have a schedule because I haven't been doing a schedule lately. But yes, you have a great evening or morning or night, whatever time it is where you are. And everybody take care. I will see you guys next time.